When people think of their time spent with the PlayStation 2, they tend to think of greatness. And why wait for greatness when it's already here? Every time I see somebody complain about how the current PlayStation is lacking in titles compared to the PS2, I always think you can still play the PS2, or can you? Well, I'm here to report that I'm pressing the buttons, I'm looking at what's on screen, and there's a smile on my face. And I know I'm not the only one, so seems like you can. And because the PS2 already did the whole be a good console with good games thing, there's plenty to choose from, in which case, I'd like to make the argument for 5 games that I think are not only still good, but will always be good. And most of the games I'll be talking about are games that don't get much attention, so yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for all the well-known hits like Metal Gear Solid and Kingdom Hearts to be mentioned. Not that those aren't good games, but I wanted to suggest a more personal list of games to all of you. Plus, I suspect my copy of Metal Gear Solid 3 is getting too big of an ego as it is. So with that, let's jump in with Klonoa 2, often regarded as one of the best platformer series that nobody talks about. When it comes to people who do know about it, they like to talk about it, and I'm no different. These games have always reminded me of Nights into Dreams, but apparently the first Klonoa's development began before Nights, despite being released after, and it's been claimed that it wasn't an influence. I remain suspicious though. But regardless of whether it was or not, I think it would appeal to fans of Nights for similar reasons. The game takes place in a very dreamlike, colorful world and has a similar aesthetic, with the main difference being that the game takes the form of a more traditional platformer with a twist. You're pretty much always moving left to right or right to left, but the way the perspective and camera changes always keeps the stage interesting. The boss fights, which you're looking at here, kind of remind me of the boss fights in Nights as well. Very creative, and it's fun to see the way the mechanics of the game are tied into both the viewing perspective as well as how you defeat the boss. Now, while I can recommend the Klonoa games, I can't recommend their prices. That is, not unless you go for the Japanese releases or the Fantasy Reverie release, available on more modern consoles like the PS5 and Switch. Okay, next game I want to talk about is Time Crisis 3, although you certainly can't go wrong with Time Crisis 2 either, which is arguably a more iconic game, but I find myself enjoying Time Crisis 3 a lot, mostly because you can change your weapon as much as you want, so long as you have ammo for it, which you collect as you play. Time Crisis is essentially like the most intense game of peekaboo you've ever played, where you are the peekabooer, but instead of silly faces, you'll be dealing out destruction. Although, you might just be having so much fun that you'll be doing both. My wife remembers overhearing the first time I played this one. Peekaboo! The game's cover mechanic is without a doubt the distinguishing mechanic that sets it apart from other light gun games, and certainly what it's known for. You can avoid being hit by staying under cover or by, blasting the enemy before they have a chance to fire at you. Getting in and out of cover is controlled by a button on the bottom of the GunCon 2, something that can be a hassle to set up due to the cords it requires, though it does provide highly accurate results. That said, if you want something that feels more like the arcade, which used a foot pedal, you can just stick a controller on the ground and pressing any button will serve as the getting in and out of cover function. So long as you don't mind putting your nasty foot on a controller, but hey, that's what the Mad Catz controller you make your friend play with is for. You can also, of course, use a regular controller to play the actual game with instead of the light gun. Some might say it's not the same experience as the GunCon, but I'd say it's still fun and you can always get the Gun Con 2 for it later. I don't know though, I still think there was a missed opportunity for the game's marketing team. Next game up is one that almost nobody would have guessed because almost nobody's ever heard of it, and that would be the amazing shoot 'em up by famed developer Cave, Espgaluda. And while its sequel, as well as the game it's a spin-off to, are more easily obtained on newer consoles, as of this video, this one only ever got a port on the good old PS2, and was only ever released in Japan because, yeah, just look at it, it's a pretty Japanese game, and US marketing didn't always know how to localize shoot 'em ups. So here you have a game in a genre, specifically bullet hell shoot 'em ups, that most people ignore, that was only released in Japan, and to make things even more unconventional, I'm playing it with my TV rotated onto its side to get the full resolution, trust me, it's a thing, and with an oddball controller, a Saturn controller made for PS2. But as weird as all these circumstances are, and as much as this could be seen as a recommendation to ignore from a weird guy who does weird things, the game is actually incredibly beginner-friendly and probably the best recommendation I could give as a bullet hell shoot 'em up for beginners, a genre that scares a lot of people. From what I understand, the developers actually intended this game to be a way for people to get used to the genre, a genre that requires mental toughness to be sure. What I used to do to prepare for these types of games is think about all my life's failures. The main mechanic this game has that sets it apart and makes it so beginner-friendly is that you can actually slow down time, not indefinitely, but enough to help yourself out for the trickier parts. It's also tied into the game's scoring, with you receiving extra points for any bullets remaining on screen when you defeat an enemy while in the slow motion mode, which oftentimes lines up with the trickier parts of the game anyways, so it's a very clever and well implemented mechanic if you ask me, making the game great whether you're playing purely for survival or for score. Plus, just look at it. I've always loved how colorful these games are. This game is a ton of fun to play, and I think it'll stand the test of time well due to the way it caters towards those getting into the genre. Alright, but after a game most of you probably haven't heard of, let's move to the game on my list that you would all be most likely to have heard of. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. Extra points for the silly name, but there's still a chance some of you aren't familiar with this game, as the Ratchet and Clank and the Jak and Daxter games tended to get more publicity. I've always liked the Sly Cooper games the most, though. The first game in the series here is just a good old-fashioned platformer with set get from point A to point B levels to make your way through, with a little bit of a twist in that you can be sneaky at times, with stealth mechanics integrated into parts of the levels, creative levels that is. I tell ya, if Super Mario Bros. Wonder has taught us anything, besides that I wish more of my favorite characters would turn into elephants, it's that platformers thrive by constantly throwing stages at you that each have something different and unique going for them. And I feel Sly Cooper excels at this. The way Sly moves around gives a distinct quality to the game as well. You feel like a sneaky raccoon. Ever since I was charged by a pack of raccoons during a late night walk, I find I have a healthy respect for raccoons and can appreciate the way they move. For the final game on my list, we have Maximo Ghosts to Glory, an often forgotten game in the Ghosts and Goblins series lineage, being sort of an offshoot game. What I like about this game is that, similar to the Ghosts and Goblins games, it has an arcade feel to the game structure and design. Of course, that also means the game is very difficult, but I like the challenge. In fact, this game might be enjoyable for me forever because I'll be trying to actually beat it forever. Wouldn't be the first thing that's whooped my butt sideways countless times, and yet I keep coming back to it. For example, life. I don't mind having a good challenge sitting on my shelf, though. What I mind is when games waste my time with a lot of superfluous stuff on the side or in between the good parts, but not here, just a very tightly packed game that will keep you engaged. But there we have it for my list of games. Of course, these are certainly not the only games that will always be enjoyable on the PS2. These are just the ones that I wanted to highlight that I don't see much coverage of. Doesn't mean I wouldn't love to hear which games all of you want to highlight, though. So with that, let me know which games you would choose in addition to what you think of the ones I chose. I'm looking forward to reading your comments as always, and I will see ya in the next video. Also, you still haven't finished Okami yet, have ya?
He's the retro bird, yeah. And he's talking about video games.